The news doesn't come with any instructions.
Hello, very good afternoon. You are
At school, they teach you how to analyse books and pictures, but no one ever tells you how to make sense of that far more powerful, questionable art form, the news. We're taught to decode Shakespeare, but not the celebrity section of the Daily Mail, George Eliot, but not the Sun. And yet the news is the most powerful force out there, shaping how we view political and economic reality. No wonder revolutionaries head to the TV and radio stations first whenever they want to change stuff. Here's my list of some of what's questionable about the news. Modern democratic nations think badly of censorship. They pride themselves on how much information is out there. But there's an awkward fact about information. If you have too much of it, it starts to numb you. You lose the thread. You forget what you were even interested in, or what could be changed. Rather than making us more political, an excess of information can erode any sense of what the real priorities are. Here's the paranoid, frightening thought. If you want to make people accepting of the status quo, you've got two options. Either give them no news at all, or, more slyly, give them the opposite. So much news, they'll drown in it. Then nothing will ever have to change. Thoughtful people often imagine that what makes news organisations serious and worthy is their ability to provide us with information that's unbiased. But this bias against bias is fundamentally mistaken. Facts only become meaningful to us when they slot into some picture of what matters. Neutrality is simply impossible vis-à-vis the biggest questions. Think of the big figures of history: Plato, the Buddha, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela. All of these have been highly biased. Their judgments were anything but perfectly balanced. We don't need news stripped of bias. We need news presented to us with the best kinds of bias. The news might tell us what's happening in the economic establishment, but it fails to tell us what might or should happen. It sets an agenda, but this agenda is woefully limited. The so-called debate about the economy doesn't stray beyond some tightly defined lines, restricting the audience's understanding of what's actually possible. Alternative views soon end up in the territory of what's dismissed as radical and ridiculous. The news terrifies us every day about floods, fires, cancer. And at the same time, it makes us furious, mostly at apparently incompetent people running the country, messing everything up. News outlets badly need their audiences to be agitated, frightened and bothered a lot of the time. And yet we have an even greater responsibility to try to remain resilient and to see that the news is in part at least winding us up for its own ends, to keep itself in a job. We hear about terrible catastrophes all the time, 300 gone here, 1,000 starving there, and yet in our hearts we often don't much care. Is it because we're shallow and cold? No, it's just that the news doesn't help us to care, because it parachutes us into places only when disaster strikes. But we can't care about people in trouble when we didn't know them when things were okay. We need to know the steady state of a land before we can be motivated to care about its crises. The news ends up corrupting us with a sense of the overwhelming importance of our own era and concerns, our debt, our affairs, our parties, our rogue missiles. But a good life involves realizing that there are moments when the news no longer has anything important to teach us, when we have to leave it behind to focus more intently on some of our own anxieties and hopes in a brief time we're all allotted.